Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. It's Friday! Yay, it's Friday. It's Friday. Nah, who cares? All right, it's Friday, April 10th, 2020. 10-2020, if you're into that sort of thing. If there are any places that you can go and, I guess, buy lottery tickets without risking your health. I'm not certain whether you can do that. Maybe you can buy them online these days. I don't know. I haven't checked into it. Ought to check everything that you can buy online today. All right. Still under lock and key, most of us, of course. And, well, it's getting old. And I imagine that the administration will at some point use that feeling to try and leverage us back open again. Steve Mnuchin already talking about opening the economy, whatever that's supposed to mean, in May at some point. And I imagine he'll have some support from people who are, A, tired of staying at home, B, think the stock market is maybe the most important thing in the world, C, haven't had the peak surge of the disease reach their area yet, or I guess D, people who have had the peak reach their area and now think, well, it's all over, which it isn't, of course. Greg Dworkin not here with us today to lecture us as to exactly why that's the case, but I think everybody by now understands it very well, which is, of course, the actual point of having Greg on, besides just the fun and companionship. But the actual point of his having pressed this issue for so long and so frequently is that I think we're all more or less conversant in it or understand pretty much what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. If only the President of the United States and his advisors were equally well informed. But we find more and more examples, by the way, of people who are ostensibly in charge of some political body or another, some either the country, the state, a locality, etc., who continue to profess really out-of-date understandings of what we've found with this coronavirus. I think just the other day, was it, well, we've seen everybody do it. The governor of Florida did it, the governor of Georgia has done it. Even the mayor of New York City has from time to time done this. But I think, was it maybe Ron DeSantis? I saw quoted the other day. Plus, of course, I think there was a clip circulating yesterday of a former, I guess now we know how come former New York Times reporter, I guess, who lost his mind and I guess jumped ship or was kicked out, fired. I have no idea what happened to the guy. I don't know who it is. But he was on Sean Hannity last night, and even Sean Hannity couldn't stand listening to him misinform people about this. He was still going with the old story about how people under, I think he was going with 25, were essentially immune from COVID-19. And no one had died. I think he asserted that no one under the age of 25 anywhere in the country had died from COVID-19, which is just flat not true. And we've seen plenty of it. And really the thinking that there was some sort of age cutoff after which people were susceptible to this, but under which people were not, is ancient and outmoded thinking and never really had any validity here in the United States. And the New York outbreak pretty well proved that. Although it may be that there's, greater danger, certainly, to those who are older or who have comorbidities or what have you, other underlying conditions. That's certainly true. But the fact that, or the idea that people under a certain age simply wouldn't contract the serious form of the disease was never true. And it's amazing that people who get themselves in these positions, either in elected positions or put themselves on television to talk about it, have not bothered to update their understanding of what's going on. That's really just, I don't know, it's disturbing and annoying to all of us. So we see it in everything. It's not just around coronavirus. People who are unqualified to comment on these things get themselves in these positions all the time. I just thought that, maybe it's the difference between being in, these under these stay-home orders, for ordinary people, you find yourself with, if not necessarily more time on your hands. There's certainly a lot of people who don't feel that that's the case, but you're spending your time differently. And a lot of the time is spent looking at the news to see if you can glean some new direction, or are we getting, are things getting better? Are we turning a corner? Or how long might it be? What else is going on elsewhere in the world, et cetera, et cetera. That's an overriding interest for me and probably other people who are always news junkies. And you would think that if you were the governor of your state, that too would be of interest to you. You would check the news every day because your job is to stay up on the news, figure out what's going on, and lead your political, subdivision, whatever it may happen to be, out of the crisis. And I guess that's just not the case for people like that. And I suppose there's an argument to make that they're extraordinarily busy. Maybe is that, I still, you're supposed to have the idea is if the job is well done, you'll have hired people to help you keep up with the news and tell you what's going on in brief, or hand you a written briefing or something that would keep you up to speed on what was happening. And apparently it's just not the case. All right. Other tidbits that require discussion coming in from around the world and around the country. Big news made yesterday afternoon and evening with, and now translating into front page tabloid, full page tabloid photo spreads in New York City, both the New York Post and Daily News picking this up. I guess somebody who, I don't know, flew a drone out over Hart Island outside of New York City, or I guess just in the outskirts of New York City, which is the current site used by the city, as I understand it, for burials of the destitute, those whose next of kin, for whatever reason, whether they exist or not, do not come and claim the bodies that are in possession of the city because they've died within the city bounds, and they are buried in, what we used to call, I guess, I don't know what we call them now, paupers' graves in these patches of land, islands out in the, I guess, in the rivers. And in this case, Hart Island, and somebody with their drone captured footage of what is essentially, I mean, there's no other way to describe it, and I guess all paupers' graves in a certain sense are like this, but they're mass graves. They are dealing with so many bodies unclaimed that they are, well, as they say, stacking them like cordwood, although they're not precisely like cordwood. But they are. That's what's happening, is they've dug these massive trenches with bulldozers, and there's workers in there stacking up, rectangular pine coffins, and it looks like they're stacking them like, 3 and 4 deep. They're in these very deep trenches, and they're just stacking them up and then bulldozing earth on top of them. I guess that's the thing you do with a bunch of unclaimed bodies. But I think that really probably brought home the scale of what was happening in New York City, certainly to the New Yorkers who read this. And who knows whether Trump has rendered the rest of the country so callous to suffering in general, or so callous to suffering perhaps among liberal idiots in coastal elite New York or something like that, that they don't care anymore. I don't know. I'm not certain how it goes. I'll grab one of the tweets that captures both of those front pages for you to see. Just, I guess, kind of going to end up being iconic depiction of the times, I assume. Anyway, yes, so here we are on a Friday, and with plenty to catch up on. As a matter of fact, Bill has his ideas about what we ought to catch up on. Tells us from Portland, Maine, where they're buried under snow, I understand. They had a weird April blizzard up there, and I don't know. I imagine that's certainly more common in Maine than it is say here, though it has happened down here, and I recall at least once or twice where there's been but down here in Virginia, it's sort of a snow squall. Doesn't really pile up the way it was piling up in Maine. But anyway, I guess he finds plenty of time, not only being under lockdown, but also now I guess being snowed in on top of everything else. It is Friday, of course, and Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Bill says, we'll try to catch up on some of the major stories that have slipped through the cracks. That's true. Starting off with the shocking news from AP that President Coolidge sleeps at least 10 hours a day. Total madness. Yes, well, I was waiting for a while to get that one in there. But thank you for getting that one out. That's not even the oldest story I have in pocket, which is pretty amazing. But I do have quite a few real doozies for you. Let's see. As a matter of fact, well, today being Friday, we mentioned yesterday when Greg was on the show, federal funds end today for the testing program, such as it was. It was, of course, supposed to result in large numbers of drive-through testing centers being located in the parking lots of our major retailers. You may recall from as Mark Sumner summarized in his tweet thread yesterday, the March 13th press conference at which there was, television FaceTime for the CEOs of these major retailers, all promising this nationwide testing offensive, essentially. And instead, all we got was the offensive news yesterday that after testing about 250 people a day, not the general public, but first responders, and that's a great idea and everything, but testing far fewer Americans than we thought was going to be the case. The 5 centers they actually stood up are now going to be closed down, and who knows how much other testing out there, sponsored ostensibly by private entities or state entities, etc., but underwritten with federal money, are likewise going to close up. I don't know. We'll find out. As for the commonality, I guess, would that be the right word, of how common such snowstorms might be in April for our neighbors to the north, Ricky May tells us from Canuckistan, as she likes to put it, that it's not really all that common. And really, for all intents and purposes, aren't Maine and Canada the same thing? Let's insult everybody all at once. Not really that common, she says. Although, let's say, you're on Prince Edward Island. Is that different? I could see it maybe just being slightly different because of the geography and the way that affects the weather patterns. I don't know. It's not all that common. Snow in April is not an every year sort of thing, but it's not not like standing the weather patterns on their heads entirely. Anyway, all right, let's see. Other things that have occupied time this morning before we get into the deep dive into Pocket and try and clear some of these weirder stories out. I have noticed, as has Molly Jung Fast, that there's something weird going on in the White House. She's grabbed Jim Roberts' tweet, NYC Jim, as we know him on Twitter, noting that the White House is expected to announce soon, very soon, 2 weeks, a new economy-focused coronavirus task force, which, whatever, that would include Steve Mnuchin, Larry Kudlow, Ivanka, and others. And Molly Jung Fast kind of asking the obvious question, why is the president's daughter on this economy-focused task force? Remember, of course, Trump is convinced that Ivanka herself was personally responsible for the creation of 15 million jobs in this country. Almost as many jobs as her father destroyed in the last 3 weeks, but, whatever. Just thought we'd kind of point that out. But that's, I guess, why he put her on there. She needs something to do. She's bored during the lockdown, etc. And I did wonder about this. It's kind of interesting that she ends up on everything, and her husband ends up on everything as well. To me, it's sort of like when your kids show up in your Zoom meeting. It's, for everybody else, it's adorable. But as others have pointed out, most people have the good sense not to just give up the seat and put their kids in charge of the Zoom meeting. You pat them on the head, tell them to say hi to everybody, and then shoo them out there to go play. you don't put him in charge of policy. Though there was another great observation, I thought, right along with the Jim Roberts tweet. Where did that one go? I think I retweeted it so I can go and check the web page of my Twitter feed and give credit to the person who came up with this one, because it was a good one, I thought. Yes, Adam Rifkin. Adam Rifkin, well, look at this. A blue check mark sort of fellow, and a follower on Twitter as well. So, hi, Adam. How are you? Co-CEO of Trout Girl. But I couldn't tell you what that was. But I'm sure it's something really interesting and fun. And maybe I do know, and I just am not sure of myself here. Well, let's see. No, I don't think I could tell you what that's all about. However, as I said, the real point here is the very clever statement about what Jim Roberts had said, but just pointing out that the same players over and over again, Mnuchin and Ivanka, and who else was on this one? I can't even remember who else he named for this one. Oh, yes, Larry Kudlow. And he's just pointing out this is like Gilligan's Island, where the same 7 people have to do everything, and all they have is coconuts, except, here they have coconuts for heads as well. And sort of a disturbing situation. All right, let's see. I think that's really it for what grabbed my attention in the last couple minutes prior to the show. That's pretty much my show prep these days. That's what I have time to take care of as things go on. All right. Let me put all these fantastic things away for easy retrieval later on, and we can dig out some of these more interesting stories. All right. I'll go to Pocket like I promised, and scroll down a bit. This is going to take me a little while to find exactly what I wanted to give you, but there's an awful lot to catch up on. As a matter of fact, here's the first one. Why don't we just stop right here on my way down? This is a later addition to the collection, and something that I feel badly about having missed to this point, and it has to do, I think, with not there being so much news locally that I don't cast out the the feelers for everything else that's going on in the world. And my wife came up with this one actually, and was just reading the newspaper and told me about what was going on, and I couldn't believe that we hadn't made mention of it, and that the world hadn't taken notice of it. We've been watching the effects of the pandemic, of course, in our own neighborhoods and around the country, and watching some of the countries that have struggled most openly, most clearly at the top of the lists of the numbers of infected and sick and dead, and the names remain the same at the top of the list. Although, by the way, things shaking up just a little bit. The United States a long time ago, of course, surpassed everybody with the number of cases of diagnosed COVID-19, and now runs about 4 or 5 times the rate of cases of the next nearest country. This morning's worldometers.info numbers are the U.S. with 468,895 cases, next being Spain with 157,022 cases. Of course, Italy was much in the news, China much in the news. China now dropping down in the charts. They're still in the 81,000s, reportedly, in terms of new cases, but it currently runs U.S., Spain, Italy, Germany, France, China, Iran, UK. The UK, by the way, beginning to post numbers rivaling Italy's mortality rate. Both UK and Italy running at about 12% mortality, according to their number of reported cases and total deaths. It's really kind of astounding. The U.S. Running right about 3.5%, which is kind of what some of the more alarmist predictions actually were. But as we know, our testing regime throws that whole number into question, because there are probably several 100,000 more undiagnosed cases that are not been fatal, and that will change the numbers greatly. Anyway, it takes a long time to get down the list before you start to see the numbers in Central America. And so it had been my hope that the virus hadn't really impacted that greatly down there. It seemed to sort of be migrating in the Western Hemisphere from the north downward. The South in the United States was late in reporting cases. For a while, Mexico was largely untouched, and my hope was that just somehow, even though our modern era of air travel doesn't suggest that it would make any sense that the virus would really be migrating, as if by foot. But it seemed to be the case that the southern part of our hemisphere was less impacted. And then it sort of, I guess, became, we have so many people impacted here, we're not even paying attention. So here's this story, which will take us into the break and beyond. I think Ecuador. Ecuador gives a glimpse into the pandemic's impact in Latin America. And I'm assured that this story is really actually quite shocking. It's interesting because as I'm looking at the Worldometer numbers and I scroll down to see, how far down do I have to go before I see Ecuador? The numbers don't look that horrific. And I guess the real story is the reporting out of Ecuador is probably just inadequate. And our first glimpse of what's going on may be stories like this one in the New York Times. Let's see. I'll skip right down to the story itself. Credit here to Jose Maria Leon Cabrera and Anatoly Kurmanayev for this April 8th piece datelined from Quito, Ecuador. Bodies left out on sidewalks. That's not good. Authorities struggling to keep track of deaths. Funeral parlors out of coffins using cardboard boxes made by companies that usually package bananas and shrimp. It's rather grim, don't you think? Where have we been in all this? The calamity unfolding in Ecuador's business capital, which is Guayaquil, I'm guessing is the pronunciation of that one. I've not run into the but I'm not too bad with Spanish. Guayaquil offers an ominous look at how officials' ability to respond to the coronavirus pandemic in Latin America can be dangerously hamstrung by the inequality, weak public services, and fragile economies that mark much of the region. And we've been finding out with increasing certainty over the last couple of days that that's the case in our own country, that our divisions of inequality likewise outline an inequality in the impact that the virus has had on our own society. After a brief period during which it was fashionable to suppose that the virus was a great equalizer and that we were all equally impacted in terms of staying home, which was actually never true, and all equally impacted in our susceptibility to the disease. And that may be true, although I have a feeling that it's spreading far faster in disadvantaged communities. But in addition, it was impacting people harder. They had less access to medical care and adequate intervention that you could do yourself at home before having to rely on the emergency room, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen a very disparate impact in our own country, and I imagine it's only more pronounced in Central America. Okay, so as we were saying here, what we're seeing in Guayaquil, and here we're into a quote here, is what can happen in most of South America's large cities, where pockets of cosmopolitan richness coexist with widespread poverty. And Trump's aim for the United States as well, by the way. This, according to Alexandra Moncada, who directs activities in Ecuador for the international aid organization CARE. That's C-A-R-E, an acronym, and I don't know what it stands for, but you get the gist of it. It's one of those good acronyms that makes sense. A country of 17 million Ecuador has one of the highest official rates of coronavirus infections and deaths per capita in Latin America. And I'm somewhat surprised by it, like I said, because the Worldometer numbers indicate considerably less. And Worldometer depends on its numbers. Its methodology is explained somewhere, but it depends on essentially reporting, either from official sources or from news sources for its numbers. And they list Ecuador with a total of 4,965 cases and 272 total deaths, which, while obviously of greater impact in a smaller society, in a country of 17 million, those numbers don't reflect what's going on in this reporting. Maybe this reporting will change things for Worldometers. All right. We have our break upcoming, and we'll take 2 minutes to regroup and take some of this in. But let's continue on with what we can before we cut out for our short break. It is still unclear why it has been affected so deeply. Some experts believe the virus may have traveled along the country's deep migratory links with hard-hit Spain and Italy. This is sort of an interesting thing that you may not have known about Ecuador. I certainly didn't. As we said, may have traveled along the country's deep migratory links with hard-hit Spain and Italy, then spread as Ecuador lagged in adopting social distancing measures. And maybe that we look to Central and South America for the real impact of lagging behind on those measures. All right, we'll take our break. 2 minutes, clear the frog out of the throat, see if we can't get ourselves together and plunge into the rest of this article. Really important, so stay tuned. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's continue on with this article about the coronavirus outbreak in Ecuador and its curious impacts there. Ecuador's official coronavirus death count rose to 220 on Tuesday, the latest number available. So that's not out of keeping, really, with the numbers I just saw in the Worldometer here. But okay, well, just continuing on here. Ecuador's official coronavirus death count rose to 220. We're now in the 270s, with 182 other cases listed as probable but unconfirmed, higher than its larger and more populous neighbors, Peru and Colombia. Ecuador's president, Lenin Moreno, that's going to make him very popular in the United States, Lenin, but okay, has warned that the real figure is much higher, and apparently is, based on the picture being drawn here, but that because testing is limited, the true extent of infections is impossible to determine. Most deaths have occurred in Guayaquil, a dynamic port city of 3 million on the Pacific, which became the first major metropolis in the region to see its public services break down. Since the start of the crisis in late March, the government has recovered 1,350 bodies from Guayaquil's homes, according to the office of Jorge Wated, who heads the task force responsible for picking up the dead in the city. About 60 bodies are collected daily, his office said. So that's a considerably starker picture even than we were getting out of New York. I mean, the city services in New York remained at least viable to the point where, I mean, there were a lot of New York residents that I would watch on Twitter reporting that, the real issue is everybody stuck in their homes, but the ambulance sirens are constantly wailing. And we heard about the refrigerated trucks that had to be used as makeshift morgues, and of course this morning about the mass burials. But this is really something. We did hear a little bit about even in New York, them finding that some 8 to 10 times the normal number of people were being found dead in their homes, and that I guess the real issue that got brought up in the context was that those people who had already died were, of course, not being tested for coronavirus and might not be included in the number of coronavirus victims for official purposes because they don't get tested, but that with these in-home deaths running at 8 to 10 times normal, there's just no way that a substantial portion of them aren't coronavirus positive. But here in a much smaller pool here, they're collecting 60 bodies a day just of people who are essentially found dead in their homes. The virus tore through luxurious gated communities and poor hillside neighborhoods. Within days, the explosion of mortality overwhelmed the authorities, and hundreds of bodies began to accumulate in hospitals, morgues, and homes. Lourdes Frias said she spent 5 days trying to get someone to collect the body of an elderly neighbor who died last week after having respiratory problems. Emergency phone lines were constantly busy, she said. On the rare occasions when she got through, she was told no one was available to help. As the days went on, others in her building in the Socio Vivienda neighborhood of Guayaquil began to clamor for the body to be taken to the street. Police eventually removed the remains. Our situation is a nightmare from which we are unable to wake up, Ms. Frias said. The surge of deaths in Guayaquil and the images circulating on social media of bodies wrapped in plastic and left on doorsteps, like bubonic plague almost here, has exposed the pandemic's potential impact on the poor in developing countries where access to health care and other resources is faulty even in the best of times. As the virus spread, some families said their loved ones had spent days seeking hospital treatment. Recovering their relatives' bodies took days, as did trying to have them buried. The cadaver crisis reached such proportions that the local cardboard manufacturers, which normally produce packaging for exported agricultural products, last week began donating cardboard coffins to the affected families. This is something beneficial. This is a solution, said Pedro Huerta, whose packaging plant in Guayaquil is donating 600 cardboard coffins a day. Hello, that's a much larger number than the official count would indicate. His plant's cardboard usually packages Ecuador's bananas for dole. Like many Guayaquil residents who work in the informal economy without benefits or job security, Ms. Frias, a house cleaner, lost her ability to earn a living when the quarantine was imposed. At the same time, shortages caused by the lockdown made food prices shoot up. Residents say the price of potatoes, a national staple, has soared in Guayaquil in recent weeks. $1 used to fetch 5 pounds of potatoes. Now it buys just 1. To alleviate the economic pain, last week the government began paying informal workers a $60 monthly stipend to stay home. They're doing better than we are. I mean, we're supposed to get more money than that, but soon, 2 weeks. We'll see whether it happens. We'll see what happens, right? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The amount is about a quarter of what a housekeeper like Ms. Frias typically earns in a month. I always liked to have my things, my beans, my rice, she said. Now I'm living on God's grace. The pandemic has left Ecuador's already troubled economy with few options beyond the handouts. The collapse of oil prices has decimated the government's main source of revenue. An ill-timed austerity package, always one of those, and always ill-timed, pushed by Mr. Moreno, Lenin. The president, to assuage international creditors, led to the firing of up to 3,500 public health workers last year. That was bad timing. And Ecuador's decision to use American dollars as its official currency, that's interesting for our Lenin, made a financial crisis in 2000. It didn't make a financial crisis. It was made during a financial crisis, because it might make a financial crisis, but the idea was not to. But this all means Mr. Moreno cannot print more money to compensate the affected workers. The economic pressures faced by Guayaquil's poor underline the complex class dynamics that have fueled the epidemic in the country and that may be replicated across the continent. The virus's ability to overwhelm capacity in Guayaquil so quickly can be seen as a warning sign for the region, said Harbas Barbosa, Assistant Director of the World Health Organization's Americas office. We believe everybody at some point will go through widespread community transmission of the virus, he said. Some of the first confirmed infections in Guayaquil were traced to well-off Ecuadorian students who had been attending school in Spain but returned to their families to escape the outbreak in Europe. Well, they didn't. I mean, they escaped it in Europe. They just now are experiencing it in Ecuador instead. Infections spread at high society weddings last month, according to the local authorities. We've had a similar problem. By the time the virus found its way to the slums, the dynamic had reversed. While better-off Ecuadorians were able to stock up on provisions and retreat to their homes, many manual workers have defied the government's stay-at-home orders to make ends meet. Residents of poor neighborhoods say many of their neighbors continue to work every day, increasing the risk of contagion. Some are going door-to-door begging for food. Also not a great idea, but what else are you going to do if you're starving? But terrible for containing the virus. Banks turned into high-risk areas once Ecuadorians, many without bank accounts, showed up in large numbers to retrieve their $60 stipend in cash. Also an issue. And we likewise still haven't really worked out how we're going to get money in a timely fashion into the hands of those who don't have the luxury of having it direct deposited. There are colleagues who continue going out every day because they are the only breadwinners, said Lenny Quiroz, the Guayaquil-based head of Ecuador's Union of House Cleaners. People are being left without money, without food. Ecuador's crisis has hit particularly hard the approximately 500,000 Venezuelans who have fled their country's economic collapse. Unlike Ecuadorians, they are not eligible for the government's stimulus payments. Sounds familiar. Although Ecuador nominally has universal health care, many fear they will be the last in line for treatment. Genesis Portillo, 26, came to Ecuador from Venezuela 6 months ago with her boyfriend. They both found jobs as sales assistants in the city of Machala, about 3 hours from Guayaquil, but lost them in the pandemic. They said that they had spent their last savings stocking up on food. The stockpile should last about a month, they said, but they have no means of getting back home if conditions deteriorate. I've found people who have helped us because they know we're all together in this crisis, but I'm afraid of getting sick, Ms. Portillo said. If there's no resources to attend the Ecuadorians, what's left for an immigrant? Good question, and one we have to answer ourselves here in the U.S. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because, while we've been looking at the impacts of the crisis abroad, yes, we haven't really spent any time on Central and South America, and given what we're learning about the disparate impact even here in the United States, there's worse yet to come in the Southern Hemisphere. By the way, here's a nice note, and my wife can take part in this one. Kate Sherrill pointing out here, The sounds of Kagro X's family having breakfast in the background is making me nostalgic for dining out. Yes, I'm here in a diner interviewing typical American voters. And oddly, they all are interested in Ecuador, which I hadn't really expected. But it's, yeah, I know. It sounds like I mean, it's got a nice political ring to it. If I were broadcasting from Iowa or New Hampshire earlier in the year, it would make a lot of sense. Or now I can just go around and ask people if they still support Trump, I suppose. And we're in a great diner for that one, by the way, because the answers are going to be fantastic. I can't wait. All right. Let's see. Shifting to another, let's say, off the beaten path coronavirus story. I got a couple of interesting ones here. One that sort of stands alone. We'll take a look at this one. And this not unfamiliar. You may have seen stories or photos, or unfortunately some of the photos didn't turn out to be true. And I always wonder why people bother with faking certain kinds of photos. I never really understand what they get out of it. But we've seen some photos that are actually real about the impact of the mostly worldwide lockdown on the natural world around us, and the waters clearing, the air clearing. I understood the other day that satellites in orbit were registering, cleaner air with less greenhouse gas output, which stands to reason with factories shut down and hardly anybody commuting and idling in traffic as a result. But the coastal waters clearing. Early on, one of the more popular stories was of the canals of Venice clearing, and I guess that was possible without all the churn of boat traffic in the canals. It looked like perhaps the sediment had settled and the water had cleared, and you were able to see fish swimming in the canal and swans also swimming in the canals. Then I guess that wasn't enough for some people, and they decided they were going to Photoshop it. It turned out to be a Photoshop of dolphins swimming in the canals. And I don't know why anybody felt that they had to go one step too far, but that one turned out to be fake, according to National Geographic anyway. But lots of other things with that I think are still verified, but sometimes rare sightings of wildlife, in some cases wildlife thought to be extinct at some point, making appearances, and just other wildlife wandering into human habitat where they probably crept around at night, but we're finding it was now safe to be out in the day, resulting in some nice, interesting photography. Well, in the Atlantic, back on April 2nd, way back when, this piece appeared by Marina Koren. The pandemic is turning the natural world upside down. Widespread social distancing measures have produced some jarring effects across land, air, and sea. Kind of interested in bringing some of that stuff up. And some of it might even be uplifting. Let's take a look. From inside her living room in London, Paula, oh my goodness, what is this last name? Koelmeyer. We'll say it's Koelmeyer. See, check this out. Koelmeijer. And I'm guessing that Meijer might be like Meyer. Koelmeyer. We'll go with that. Paula Koelmeyer can feel the world around her growing quieter. This is in her living room in London. Why? It's not because she's putting in earplugs. She is a seismologist. And so, therefore, I don't know. Why have ears? I guess you're always just looking at instruments. But no, there's more to it. Koelmeyer, a seismologist, has a miniature seismometer sitting on a concrete slab at the base of her first floor fireplace. I'm sure that's a very attractive knick-knack and a conversation starter. The concrete slab by itself, not so much. But okay, that's a necessary part of things. The apparatus, though smaller than a box of tissues, interesting, can sense all kinds of movement, from the rattle of trains on the tracks near Koelmeyer's home, to the waves of earthquakes rolling in from afar. That's, of course, what the seismograph is actually supposed to be for, or seismometer, excuse me. Seismograph, I guess, is what a seismometer produces, right? The data. Okay. Anyway, since the United Kingdom announced stricter social distancing rules last month, telling residents not to leave their homes except for essential reasons, the seismometer has registered a sharp decrease in the vibrations produced by human activity. With fewer trains, buses, and people pounding the pavement, the usual hum of public life has vanished, and so has its dependable rhythms. Before the spread of COVID-19 shut down the city, Kolomeyer could plot the seismometer's data and see the train schedule reflected in the spikes down to the minute. Now, with fewer trains running, the spikes seem to come at random. It's very literally reflecting a slowdown in our lives, Kolomeyer told me over Skype. Kolomeyer said she briefly geeked out over the recent data before reality set in. At first glance, this is indeed a fascinating observation, the kind of factoid that might appear on the underside of a Snapple cap. The wow moment is short-lived, of course, because the explanation is not a quirk of nature or some other benign eccentricity, but a catastrophic virus that has sickened and killed thousands, crumpled economies, and plunged public life into a fearful limbo with no easily discernible end. I like that she threw that in there just in case you were somehow, like I was saying, somehow being uplifted by what was going on. She found a way to knock you back down. But the response to the pandemic has unwittingly produced some other large-scale, though less conspicuous effects. In a bittersweet twist, the surreal slowdown of life as we know it has presented researchers with a rare opportunity to study the modern world under some truly bizarre conditions, and they're scrambling to collect as much data as they can. Here are 4 ways the pandemic is being felt across land, air, and sea. First, there's less rumbling on the surface. Seismologists around the world have noticed the same effect Kolomeyer detected in London and at more traditional stations than a fireplace. The trend started with Thomas Lecoq, I guess. Lecoq. It's Lecocq. A seismologist at the Royal Observatory of Belgium in Brussels. Seismic stations are usually found well outside metropolitan areas, away from vibrations that could obscure subtle tremors within Earth's interior. But the Brussels station was established more than a century ago, before a city grew around it. Today, it provides a fascinating glimpse of the ebb and flow of a bustling city. Lecoq has found that when it snows, anthropogenic seismic activity decreases, and on the day of a road race, it spikes. Well, that makes a certain amount of sense, yes. Lecoq checked seismic data the day before Belgium began a nationwide lockdown, and then the following morning. The drop in activity, he said, was immediate. Right now, daytime in Brussels resembles Christmas Day. Lecoq shared his approach online, and seismologists in the United States, France, New Zealand, and elsewhere are now seeing the effects of their country's own social distancing measures on seismic activity. For seismologists who study seismic signals from Earth's interior, rather than other sources, including people, animals, even storms, quarantines seem to have made it easier to listen. Normally, we wouldn't pick up a 5.5 magnitude earthquake from the other side of the world because it would be too noisy. But with less noise, our instrument is now able to pick up 5.5s with much nicer signals during the day, Kolomeyer said. So I guess from her living room in London, she was able to detect perhaps the earthquakes in Idaho recently, right? Well, item number 2, there's less air pollution. As cities, and in some cases entire nations, weather the pandemic under lockdown, Earth-observing satellites have detected a significant decrease in the concentration of a common air pollutant, nitrogen dioxide, which enters the atmosphere through the emissions from cars, trucks, buses, and power plants. The drop, observed in China and Europe, coincided with stringent social distancing measures on the ground. Air pollution can seriously damage human health, by the way, and the World Health Organization estimates that conditions stemming from exposure to ambient pollution, including stroke, heart disease, and respiratory illness, kill about 4.2 million people a year. Don't tell Tucker Carlson or he'll want to end the quarantine. The cleaner air could lead to a brief respite in parts of the world with severe air pollution, even as they battle coronavirus. According to an analysis by Marshall Burke, a professor in Stanford's Earth Systems Science Department, a pandemic-related reduction in particulate matter in the atmosphere, the deadliest form of air pollution, likely saved the lives of 4,000 young children and 73,000 elderly adults in China over 2 months this year. I wonder about whether, that's a pretty short-term impact, though, don't you think? I don't know whether that's, although maybe damage to the lungs from particulates is a faster-acting cause of mortality than other air pollution. There's a quantifiable temporary benefit. Joseph Makut, I'm going to guess at that pronunciation. It's M-A-J-K-U-T. Makut, you think, or Majkut? What would you guess? This is the director of climate policy at the Niskanen Center in Washington, D.C., which, as I recall, isn't that... I thought they were in New York, because that's where Rachel Bidikofer was moving to, as I recall, now that she's leaving Christopher Newport University. But anyway, I guess her colleague, or soon-to-be colleague, she can tell us perhaps how he pronounces his name. Well, we're going to guess again. Joseph Makut, maybe. Director of Climate Policy at the Niskanen Center in Washington, D.C., referring, of course, to Burke's analysis that we just read about. But, and it's an important but, as we go about our recovery, I think we'll go back to business as usual, he said. That's probably true. A drop in emissions this year, including carbon dioxide, the pollutant that causes global warming, won't, unfortunately, make a dent in the long-term effort to manage the climate crisis. We're not solving climate change by having a global pandemic, Makut said. Next up, city soundscapes are changing. With so many people staying home and public transit agencies cutting service as a result, there's significantly less noise from cars, buses, trains, and other transportation. Erica Walker, a public health researcher at Boston University, has taken a decibel meter with her on her socially distanced walks, and she has been stunned by the measurements. It's a lot quieter, she told me. My own observation is that during walks outside with reduced air traffic, the noise from nearby Dulles Airport is essentially gone. We haven't heard or not heard this since post 9/11 when all the flights were grounded. That was very noticeable. Before the coronavirus pandemic, the acoustic environment in Kenmore Square, a busy intersection near campus, is usually about 90 decibels during rush hour. Yesterday, Walker's rush hour readings were just under 68 decibels. The campus, again, Boston University, just because I had forgotten. For comparison, a subway train, by the way, rumbling past nearby, registers 95 decibels. So a busy intersection near campus, usually about 90 decibels, now down to 68. So a subway train running by 95 decibels, which is the level at which chronic exposure could result in impaired hearing. And the sound of normal conversation is about 60 to 70 decibels. So that's about where that intersection is now, from subway train to conversation. In some spots in the Fenway Park area, where Walker has studied noise pollution for several years through her program Noise and the City, her latest data show reductions close to 30 decibels. It's unbelievably a huge difference, Walker said, and I'm sure she meant an unbelievably huge difference. By the way, Noise and the City, a much less popular series on HBO, I think, than the original. City dwellers might now be hearing sounds that can get muffled by the usual drone. Rebecca Franks, an American who lives in Wuhan, of all places, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in China, made this observation 48 days into the city's quarantine last month. I used to think there weren't really birds in Wuhan because you rarely saw them and never heard them. I now know they were just muted and crowded out by traffic and people, Franks wrote on Facebook. All day long now I hear birds singing. It stops me in my tracks to hear the sound of their wings. Wings, that's something. Silvia Poggioli, an NPR correspondent in Italy, reported that the streets of Rome are so empty you can actually hear the squeak of rusty door hinges and the chirping of birds, an early sign of spring, is almost too loud. A quick search for the phrase "birds are louder" on Twitter reveals that many other people have been wondering the same thing I have lately. Are the birds chirping more fiercely these days, or am I losing my mind? Or both, I guess. With spring migration in full swing in the Northern Hemisphere, there are certainly more birds around, but the reduction in noise pollution, and in some places its total absence, might make it easier to notice the usual trilling and squawking. Quieter conditions, perhaps for several months, might seem like a good thing. It's well established that noise pollution can negatively affect our health, contributing to stress-related ailments, high blood pressure, sleep disruption, and other problems. Any potential benefits are difficult to predict without more research, Walker said, and based on recent activity in the Noise in the Cities app, where Bostonians can record neighborhood sounds and provide their own descriptions, people might respond to newfound quiet in different ways. For some residents, the new soundscape reminds them of the peacefulness of their childhood decades ago when the city was less built up. For others, it's another source of pandemic-related stress, eerie, like the calm before a storm. Except, of course, we're right in the middle of the storm, so. All right. And that, too, the music, I've noticed, is much quieter than usual, and that's because it's turned all the way down and shouldn't be. We'll take our 1-minute break here at the top of the hour and continue on with this piece, not too much further down here, but it's been really interesting. And it's too bad that the last part about people searching for things on Twitter about whether the birds are louder didn't come at the end. It would make a great segue to what I have planned for you next. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's so much quieter here on the show. When I don't talk, I could keep the noise pollution down myself. All right, the last section here. The oceans are probably quieter too. That's nice. For other species, less noise pollution is no doubt welcome. Oh, it just struck me that we introduced this piece by talking about the noise pollution in the show itself. How very interesting. It's not that it wasn't happening. It was that it was drowned out by the louder sound of my voice earlier. There was always breakfast going on in the background. But because of social distancing, no. I mean, it is because of social distancing that you're hearing other people here, though, eating breakfast. They would otherwise be distanced from me normally. I like it better this way, so we should all get used to it. So, again, the ocean's probably quieter too. For other species, less noise pollution is no doubt welcome, just not the dolphins or the fake dolphins in Venice. Michelle Fournet, a marine ecologist at Cornell who studies acoustic environments, is hoping to position underwater microphones off the coast of Alaska and Florida, where she has studied humpback whales and other marine life, to investigate how the waters have changed in the absence of noise from cruise ships, in particular, as the industry suspends operations worldwide. And maybe should pretty much suspend them forever, if you ask me. But I guess people like cruises and getting sick. I don't know. Just pulling those cruise ships out of the water is going to reduce the amount of global ocean noise almost instantaneously, Fournet told me, although she'll be adding some back as she takes a motorboat out to drop microphones down there, but whatever. It'll stop soon enough. If she gets anybody to take her there. I wonder if she'd be able to get that accomplished during the pandemic. Anyway, we're experiencing an unprecedented pause in ocean noise that probably hasn't been experienced in decades. Research has shown that ambient noise from ships and other maritime traffic can increase stress hormone levels in marine creatures, which can affect their reproductive success. Whales have even shown they can adapt to the din, pausing their singing when cargo ships are near and resuming when they move away. The unexpected ecological moment brought on by the pandemic reminds Fournet of an accidental experiment that unfolded in the days after 9/11 when ship traffic in North American waters ground to a halt. Researchers working in Canada's Bay of Fundy, hey, There you go, Ricky, nearby, right? I've been there on my way up to Prince Edward Island. So researchers working in Canada's Bay of Fundy, already making recordings and taking samples before the terrorist attacks, eventually found that over the course of just a few days, when the noisy waters calmed, right whales in the bay, in the bay, experienced a drop in their stress level hormones. That is a niche study right there. Fournay is thinking now of North Pacific humpback whales, who have begun to move northward this month and will soon be swimming with newborn calves in southeast Alaska, a region also popular with cruise ships for views of local wildlife. This will be the quietest entry that humpback whales have had in southeastern Alaska in decades, Fournay said. Nature is taking a breath when the rest of us are holding ours. Very interesting. And, it's one of the great features of the Atlantic, really, bringing out stories like that one. Now, I said that there was a transitional moment in here when we were talking about the tech and Google searches in particular. So, two interesting pieces here where they side by side, and I think these two, I think my wife spotted both of these, as a matter of fact, and sent them on to us. So there's your effect of the pandemic, is she's reading the New York Times and finding interesting articles, and we have new input into the show. Which one do we start with here? Well, they're both pretty closely related, as I recall. Maybe that's how they were found at the same time. We'll start with this one here, both from the New York Times, as I said. Google searches can help us find emerging COVID-19 outbreaks. They can also reveal symptoms that at first went undetected. I may have found a new one, says the writer of the piece here, Seth Stevens-Davidowitz. Ready for this one? He is, by the way, the author of a book called Everybody Lies, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. I have a feeling there's a chapter on Brit Hume and Ted Cruz in that book, and if there isn't, there should be, or maybe I should write that book. But okay, I think we all know what I'm talking about here. If we don't, it's them and porn. There. You got it? Every day, millions of people around the world type their health symptoms into Google. We can use these searches to help detect unknown COVID-19 outbreaks, particularly in parts of the world with poor testing infrastructure. That's true, but, watch the privacy thing, because you could probably also find out about people who have, genital herpes or whatever, and we don't want to sweep them all up into it, but I guess if you're typing that stuff into a search engine, it's not just disappearing into the ether. So watch what you do. To see the potential information lying in plain sight in Google data, consider searches for, quote, I can't smell. There is now strong evidence that anosmia, is that the correct word? Pronunciation of the word? Anosmia, or loss of smell, is a symptom of COVID-19, with some estimates suggesting that 30 to 60% of people with the disease experience this symptom. And that's the one that I think has caused a lot of people to say, I had that with what I thought was the flu in January, or maybe even as early as November. That's the big clue to the possibility of an early outbreak of coronavirus and COVID-19 here in the United States, even before we went on alert from China. Anyway, where do we leave off? Yes, in the United States, in the week ending this past Saturday, last week really, I guess, searches for I can't smell were highest in New York, New Jersey, Louisiana, and Michigan, 4 of the states with the highest prevalence of COVID-19. In fact, searches related to loss of smell during this period almost perfectly matched state-level disease prevalence rates, as the accompanying chart shows, which I'll just have to tell you about. They are plotting the search popularity index for loss of smell out of 100 on a logarithmic scale versus positive cases per 1,000 people, also on a logarithmic scale. Essentially with, New York, New Jersey, Louisiana, and let's see, Connecticut, Michigan, Massachusetts, and D.C. Pretty much the leading indicators there. But yeah, New York and New Jersey far and away more positive cases and much more popular search on the search indexes. The scale is hard to make out. What does it mean? Even I understand they've explained it's logarithmic here, but the vertical axis is marked 4, 8, 16, 40, 80. Like what does a search popularity of 80 plus mean? I don't know, but it's more popular than 4, right? So I guess there you have it. Anyway, the more popular the search was, the more prevalent positive cases of COVID-19 was, and I guess that makes a certain amount of sense. Vasilios Lampos, a computer scientist, some names we got today, a computer scientist at University College London, and other researchers have found that a bevy of symptom-related searches, loss of smell, as well as fever and shortness of breath, have tracked outbreaks around the world. Wipe down those computer keyboards, by the way. Because these searches correlate so strongly with disease prevalence rates in parts of the world with reasonably good testing, we can use these searches to try to find places where many positive cases are likely to have been missed. Consider, pick a country. As a matter of fact, I'll shout it out to the whole house and to my wife, if you've been listening at all. Pick a country out of a hat. There's 200 and something countries in the world. What country with lousy testing but high prevalence of COVID-19 is the example in this New York Times story about Google searches for symptoms? I can't hear you out there. You got to shout louder, even without all of the noise from the buses, and the whales are holding their breath as we pass. Ecuador. Consider Ecuador. Why don't we? We should. We did. We should consider it some more. The official data says that while Ecuador has among the highest rates of COVID-19 cases per capita in South America, it has a lower case rate than the United States, Canada, Australia, Iran, and most of Europe. At the same time, Ecuadorians are now making more searches related to loss of smell than any other country in the world once you adjust for total Google searches. Searches for no puedo oler, I can't smell, are some 10 times higher per Google search in Ecuador than they are in Spain, even though Ecuador officially reports more than 10 times fewer COVID-19 cases per capita than Spain does. Ecuadorians are also right near the top in searches for fever, chills, and diarrhea, which is just fantastic to have to talk about. The search data, in other words, suggests that Ecuador may be even more of a COVID-19 epicenter than the official data says. So does the other part of the New York Times on a different day, right? That could help explain recent videos that have been shared on social media of bodies piled up in the streets in Guayaquil, a port city in Ecuador, about which we learned in the first part of the show. While there does seem to be important information about COVID-19 prevalence in search data, we have to use great care in building models based on this data and learn from past attempts that tried to use this data to measure the geographic spread of different diseases. By the way, the piece at this point illustrated with a photo embedded of cars and trucks carrying coffins lined up outside a cemetery in Guayaquil, Ecuador on Thursday. And this is not one of the cardboard coffins, but the traditional and expensive carved wood, trimmed in brass, everything. It's got plastic shrink wrap on around the bottom of it, and it is strapped to the top of a regular car. I guess they're out of the hearses, and just strapped to the cargo rack of a regular car, the masked passengers beneath, heading into a burial. In a 2009 paper, this piece continues, that was published in Nature, the magazine, the journal, not just published in Nature like carved on a rock, right, and just left out there. I published that in Nature. That would be a great way of doing it. It's lowercase n Nature. I published it in Nature. I peed it into the snow up in Maine. All right, well, it depends how long the paper is. In a 2009 paper that was published in Nature, capital N, researchers famously showed that Google searches related to the flu had been closely tracking weekly data on influenza rates from the Centers for Disease Control, which I'm sure everybody calls it CDC. Everyone knows now it's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, but it just takes too long to read that way. Now, of course, it takes 5 times longer to read it because I talk about it. Researchers used these search terms to build a model to try to detect epidemics before the official data was collected. Although the model did work initially, it struggled during the 2009 H1N1 flu pandemic. See? Total disaster. Obama something, right? The problem was that flu was in the news so often, many people were searching for flu not because they were feeling symptoms, but because they were feeling curiosity or fear. Concern about flu and Google searches about flu were more in the air than actual flu. Recently, scholars have produced new methods to improve Google-based disease prevalence modeling and helped revive the influenza tracking project. They have found that it is crucial to key in on the types of searches that are most likely to be reports of symptoms rather than searches related to news. These tools are being used right now by researchers studying how searches might track COVID-19. Searches like "I can't smell" are particularly useful because the form of the query suggests that someone may have the disease, whereas other queries related to loss of smell may suggest curiosity in the topic. There is another way we can use search data during this pandemic to better understand symptom patterns of the disease. Our understanding of the progression of symptoms of the disease is still developing. It took until March 20th for widespread reports of the relationship between COVID-19 and loss of smell to surface, even though it now appears to be among the most common symptoms. There's already some evidence that clues to this symptom were evident earlier in search data. Joshua Gans, haven't we called that name before? Not sure. Joshua Gans, a professor at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, found that searches for non sento odori, I can't smell, were elevated in Italy days before the symptom was reported in the news. Nice to have another language in there too. Now we're learning to say "I can't smell" in several languages. Non sento odori, we can say. It sounds like a terrific dish that you might otherwise order at a restaurant, but it's not. It's "I can't smell," although I encourage you to try that at an Italian restaurant in the future. Iran also saw an enormous rise in searches related to loss of smell weeks before media reports of the symptom became more common. Are we not going to get the Persian version of "I can't smell"? I'd like to know. Well, anyway, then we see the spike in searches for non sento odori in this graph embedded here. Anyway, this we left off with the fact of enormous rise in searches in Iran as well. This would not have been the first time symptom patterns were evident in search query patterns before they were fully recognized by the medical community. In 2016, researchers reported that subtle patterns of searches for symptoms could predict future pancreatic cancer patients. If a person searched for indigestion and later abdominal pain, for example, they were at risk of later searching just diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Many of the precise timing patterns of symptoms leading to pancreatic cancer diagnoses were not previously understood. I have spent the past decade as a data scientist studying how Google searches and other digital data sources can help us measure a range of social and behavioral outcomes. While I'm not a medical expert, I was motivated by Professor Gans and others to explore whether Google searches might give clues of symptoms of COVID-19 that have not yet been officially reported. I think I have found a candidate symptom that might come with the disease for at least a small fraction of patients. First, I downloaded state-level Google search data in the previous week for dozens of symptoms I gathered from medicinenet.com. Next, I measured which searches were most related to a state's disease prevalence rate. In other words, I explored the question of which symptoms are now being searched in unusually high numbers in states with unusually high rates of COVID-19. The three searches most related to COVID-19 disease rates were not a surprise: loss of smell, fever, and chills. The fifth and sixth searches weren't much of a surprise either. Why not just throw this out there then? Oh, I see, because we're skipping number 4. So the fifth and sixth, nasal congestion and diarrhea, which have also received a lot of attention as COVID-19 symptoms. However, the fourth place search was a surprise: eye pain, which has not garnered much attention as a possible symptom of the disease. Searches for "my eyes hurt" over the previous week were highest in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Louisiana, and Michigan. How are they doing in Ecuador? Such searches seem to have risen in the past 2 weeks almost exclusively in parts of the country that have reached very high COVID-19 rates, although the data is fairly noisy and the rise isn't as large as it is for some other symptoms. There have been some reports of eye-related issues related to COVID-19. A March 31st paper based on the study of 38 patients in China reported that 1/3 of the patients later tested for ocular irregularities. There have been also been recent reports of Pinkeye in 1 to 3% of COVID-19 patients. Searches related to Pinkeye do not show nearly as strong a geographic relationship with COVID-19 rates as eye pain, though. In fact, all eye-related complaints except pain that I looked at show little to no relationship with COVID-19 rates. Does the Google search data really mean that eye pain is a symptom of COVID-19? Not necessarily. There may be other reasons that people in these parts of the country are searching for eye pain. However, I tested alternative explanations that people suggested to me, and they did not fit the data. The searches do not seem to be driven by allergies. They are not related to pollen concentrations. Nor do they seem to be driven by people staying at home and staring at screens more. Eye pain search rates do not correlate with data from cell phones that have measured recent reductions in movement. Yeah, that's an interesting data collection all by itself. It is hard to imagine that curiosity alone is driving the relationship between eye pain and COVID-19 prevalence rates. Other potential symptoms that have received extensive media attention don't show nearly as strong a statewide relationship with COVID-19 prevalence rates. There is also some evidence for eye pain as a symptom of COVID-19 from searches in other parts of the world. Notably, searches for eye pain rose above fourfold in Spain between the middle of February and the middle of March, and rose about 50% in Iran in March. In Italy, searches for, more Italian, bruciori occhi, or bruciori, or bruciori, I don't know, B-R-U-C-I-O-R-A, bruciori occhi, perhaps? Bruciori occhi, let's say, burning eyes, were 5 times their usual levels in March. That's a different kind of pain than I was thinking, but burning. To examine data across the world, I am mostly using Google's topic eye pain, which groups together many different searches in various languages related to the topic. I got to learn how to do these searches. Since Google reports different random samples of their data for different data requests, I have averaged a number of different samples. I think search data offers suggestive evidence that eye pain can be a symptom of the disease. However, it might only affect a small fraction of COVID-19 patients. Overall search volume for eye pain, despite rising substantially in COVID-19 hotspots, remains well below search volume for other symptoms, though people might not necessarily connect it with what's going on. In New York, there are now about 1/6 as many searches related to eye pain as there are searches related to loss of smell. Nonetheless, doctors and public health officials should probably look closely at the relationship between COVID-19 and eye pain. Greg. We'll make it your job. If nothing else, we need to understand why there is frequently a large uptick in people telling Google that their eyes hurt when known cases of COVID-19 in a location rise to extremely high levels. I'm tired of seeing all these sick people. My eyes hurt from it. More people can study search trends around the world to help us learn about COVID-19. I wonder if, we have learned about the possibility of COVID-19, of coronavirus being contracted through the eyes, and that was why the requirement of the face shields for healthcare workers. But with only a small percentage reporting eye pain, I wonder if it's most prevalent among people who contracted the disease that way, although I don't know how you tell. But maybe that's the connection. I don't know. All right, where were we? Nonetheless, doctors and public health officials should probably look closely at the relationship. Right, we assigned this to Greg. If nothing else, we need to understand why there is frequently a large uptick in people telling Google their eyes hurt when known cases of COVID-19 in a location rise to extremely high levels. More people can study search trends around the world to help us learn about COVID-19. In 2006, Google released Google Trends. I guess this is how you would do it. A public tool that the research community can use to study anonymous and aggregate search data. That is how I found everything I reported in this piece. It is plausible that important facts about the COVID-19 disease could be found here or in other large data sets by data scientists, medical experts, or even amateur data sleuths. There you go. So everybody can go to find Google Trends and conduct your own research. That's very interesting. And, closely related to another New York Times article that I will share with you if I can. It's in close proximity, too. Check this one out. Also from the New York Times, from April 5th. I got to get the dates of all these things squared away between the Ecuador article and the last one and this one. This one by Jacob Sunshine and Shyam Golakota, if I have the name correct. April 5th, their piece entitled, Alexa, Do I Have Coronavirus? There's a way to bring in big tech without compromising our privacy. Closely related article here. This one, though, datelined Seattle. 1 in 4 U.S. households have a smart speaker, and 81% of adults own a smartphone. These devices might seem to be unlikely medical instruments, unless you watch a lot of Star Trek, maybe. Yet their computing capability, storage, and sensor quality is often superior to the clinical-grade equipment used to monitor patients in an intensive care unit. Did you know that? For example, the Philips X2 monitor, a monitoring system used to measure vital signs in ICUs around the country, Greg knew that, costs thousands of dollars. Probably knew that too. The smartphone in your pocket, which is approaching that price, has a processing capability 20 times stronger. Smart speakers are 10 times as powerful. Hundreds of millions of smart speakers and phones in the U.S. and billions worldwide can be marshaled quickly as a key public health tool. Until universal testing for the coronavirus is in place, which will be a while, smart devices can identify patients for testing. Why isn't Jared Kushner on this, right? This would be right up his alley. This would even make sense. But, whatever. He's too busy stealing money. Technology companies can contribute to the national effort to fight the coronavirus pandemic by enabling their platforms to passively collect, analyze, and transmit health information. I take it all back. We don't want Jared Kushner in charge of an effort that allows the federal government to turn on the speakers and all of our microphones on all of our cell phones, even if it is to get a better picture of the spread of coronavirus, because then they're never turning those things off. So, okay, definitely reason for caution here, but an interesting theory. To be sure, this type of home monitoring raises privacy concerns, and you definitely don't want Jared Kushner involved in that. Safeguards must be in place, and he wouldn't put any, such that protected health information remains on the local device and that relevant information is communicated to public health authorities securely and only when necessary. So that's pretty much right out when it comes to trusting Jared Kushner on this. One more paragraph before we take our last break. Given the many abuses of big tech companies, this might be a hard idea to accept, but there is a way to do it ethically by having strong CDC oversight, if you trust them anymore, not allowing tech companies to monetize any of the data, and ensuring that companies can turn off these capabilities once the pandemic is over. All right, that's not happening, but it's an interesting thing to think about. We'll think more about it after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. We continue on reading about the piece, Alexa, Do I Have Coronavirus? In the New York Times. It makes a real interesting string of articles, almost as if the show were planned and we didn't ruin it with breaking news. We got to try this every Friday. Oh, we try for it every Friday. Sometimes it works. All right, where were we? Yes, hoping that tech companies would turn off capabilities to monitor our illness symptoms without our knowledge after the pandemic is over. Yeah, right. Anyway, it's the theory. For the past 6 years, we, the writers of this piece, have researched how smartphones and smart speakers can be used to passively identify diagnostic health indicators, including aberrations in breathing and cardiac arrest. You thought this wasn't going to depart greatly from the Google Trends data mining in the previous one. This is where it becomes really interesting and different. Again, they've researched how smartphones and smart speakers can be used to passively identify diagnostic health indicators, not by searching or asking Alexa if you have coronavirus, but by monitoring aberrations in breathing and cardiac arrest. Smart devices are also equipped to perform passive sensing. For example, instead of Alexa or Hey Siri, a smartphone, smart speaker, or watch could use an on-device wake word that is, let's say, instead of Alexa or Siri, the wake word is the sound of a dry cough, one of the most common presenting symptoms of COVID-19 infection. If the cough is persistent, the speaker could, anyway, in this case would, present a coronavirus symptom survey and ask a patient about the presence of fever, shortness of breath, and the existence of sick contacts. Like, what's the name of the healthcare robot in Big Hero 6, right? What's the, I can't remember the name of the, is it BMO? Is that, no, that's the, why is that in my head? That's the computer game from Adventure Time, I think, instead. I can't remember what the name of it is now. It'll come to me later, or we could look it up. But, you know, it won't go away. It won't stop listening to your cough until you tell it you're satisfied with your care. Have you all seen the cartoon movie? Yeah, okay, maybe not. Anyway, the point is that instead of Siri coming on every time I say serious when I'm on the radio, which is why I have Siri turned off on my phone, if it hears a dry cough that's the right kind of cough, and it hears it enough, it'll say, hey, do your eyes hurt? Or something like that, right? Some other questions. And do you know anybody who's sick with coronavirus? That's kind of spooky, but it could work. If the symptom screen is positive, that is, you say, yeah, my eyes do hurt and I did lose my sense of smell, the device would connect the individual to relevant public health guidance. All this can be done without any of the audio data ever leaving the user's device. Of course, it can also happen with it leaving the user's device, but okay. I wish it would work that way. It could. Another passive sensing method involves using inaudible acoustic signals. This involves the speaker emitting, get this, high-frequency tones above the range of human hearing. No word on what effects that might produce. But okay. The speaker emits high-frequency tones above the range of human hearing. The reflections of those tones, captured at the microphones, can track chest motion and extract information about a patient's breathing rate. Another important feature when too fast of coronavirus infection. That is, when you have the accelerated breathing rate, might be an indicator of coronavirus infection. Inspection is another story. In this sonar scenario, audible speech is never recorded, wink wink, a benefit for privacy. A smartphone or smart speaker could be placed on a bedside table and without contact, monitor a person's breathing and cough to predict the onset of viral respiratory infection. We are testing this hypothesis in 20 homes as part of the Seattle flu study. This data could be used to identify people for testing, track the spread of the disease, and identify where the next hotspot, such as Seattle or New York, might be, enabling an earlier response. Fascinating. A little scary, but fascinating. Importantly, this data should be anonymized and made available in real time to the medical and machine learning research communities. Yikes. We just hope that Skynet doesn't say, well, the only way to deal with this is to firebomb the city and wipe out the virus. But okay. Access to this data set would allow researchers to identify who should be tested sooner, emerging hotspots of coronavirus infections, and to generate more precise social distancing strategies that avoid the disruptions of sheltering in place. Smart devices can also be used to combat misinformation. The Wireless Emergency Alert Program, run by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and responsible for Amber Alerts, could facilitate pushing NIH-endorsed coronavirus guidelines to the nation. Of course, it could also be commandeered by President Trump and send you campaign information, which would be illegal, but what are you going to do? Arrest him, indict him, impeach him? Smart platform manufacturers must also do their part to make these devices available at an affordable cost to all. Differences in access to technology should not exacerbate health disparities. So free Apple Watches for everybody is what they're saying. Smart devices, which have connected us to family and friends during these difficult times, have an unrealized potential, and we should demand, we should look into, I would say, having that platform providers, we should demand that platform providers and the government work to responsibly enable it. Dr. Trevor Bedford, the Fred Hutchison Cancer Research Center scientist who raised an early alarm about the coronavirus in the United States, framed our collective efforts to fight this disease as the Apollo program of our times. He is right. If big technology companies work alongside public health professionals, and if privacy concerns are given credence, we might have a fighting chance. Well, that would be pretty interesting. And spooky, to be sure, but what an interesting thread of developments in technology, and of course our warning ourselves not to lose sight of what impact the coronavirus is having in Central and South America, plus some of the more beneficial of side effects in the natural world around the globe. That was really just kind of amazing to me. And lots to it, and lots that's just kind of been waiting for a moment. And Friday, I guess, finally presents itself to share those with you. And wow, I'm glad we got a chance to talk about them, and they really do hold some interesting promise and some real threat, both during the pandemic and beyond it. But there you have it. Okay, let's see. Other interesting items. I think maybe what I can do with this Here's something I've wanted to launch into, and I've been reading through it and skimming through some of the information that I've got about sort of the Wild West atmosphere out there, Project Airbridge, and the weird secondary, tertiary, repeating markets for seized PPE and ventilators used as rewards, political rewards for states and senators who are sufficiently supportive of Trump, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to figure all this out. I haven't been spending that much time trying to figure out whether or not what's happening is legal, because that doesn't matter anymore. But it is interesting if you can explain away some of the activity, perhaps it becomes either it may become less concerning, or it may provide us with a roadmap for the post-pandemic times, how to attempt to put some regulations in place that would at least help us monitor this activity and essentially outlaw it when there are Democrats in office. But there's nothing you can do with respect to law and legality when Republicans are in office. That is what we've learned. Well, in my sharing of my suppositions and watching other people share the same suppositions about what's actually happening underneath the surface in this Project Airbridge nonsense and the seizing of PPE and other important medical equipment by some unknown federal authorities, maybe FEMA, maybe not. Usually FEMA here in the U.S., but the unnamed agencies overseas. Well, let's see how to put this. I was contacted by someone who's a Daily Kos reader and I guess sometimes listener to the show too, maybe, but a longtime Daily Kos reader who is in the shipping and logistics business. And so he's been sharing some trade magazine articles about this. And I suspect that if we dig into them and try to formulate some questions about how things are happening, I suspect that somebody like him with better understanding of technicalities like who owns items that are in shipment if the cash payments for the order haven't yet changed hands, and who's, is it in fact just straight up piracy to show up on the tarmac in Shanghai and say, yes, France has quote unquote bought these masks or ventilators or what have you, and this Chinese firm has produced them with the idea in mind that they would fulfill this order. But if the money has changed hands or the money hasn't changed hands, does that change things? And what does it mean when a third party shows up and waves more cash and says, I'll give you 3 times the price that the French paid to send those masks to us? Is that something the manufacturer has the right to do? Is that something the shipper has the right to do if it's a different party? Is that something that Americans are in the right, whatever that might mean, under international law, under American law, to do these things? This is something that maybe somebody with a shipper's and logistician's insight might help with. I'll share this piece, which I think might send us down the right path to figuring out what are the right questions to ask. This is actually from late March. But again, I got it in response to my own queries and suppositions about what was happening internationally with this Project Airbridge. So here's some commentary in FreightWaves, FreightWaves.com. You'll find it online. Trade magazine for freight shippers. And this doesn't deal directly with the question of the legality of what's going on, and doesn't even really deal with what was going on in terms of stealing shipments out from underneath one another, but lays some good groundwork that it might be something worth thinking about over the weekend And let's see if we all agree. There's a commentary piece here. To get America through this pandemic, the supply chain needs to be tested, sequestered, and compensated. This is actually a very different aspect of the problem. But I guess in the first instance, when this person who is sharing these articles with me was at first responding to my questions about, what was going on out there, but also just my other comments and comments others have made and observations others have made about who's an essential employee, et cetera, et cetera. We've all been surprised / not surprised, for some of us who think about these things more deeply, I guess, or at all, to find out that, the people working at the grocery store, the people working at the restaurants, at McDonald's, et cetera, carrying the mail, delivering our packages, sometimes paid considerably less than they ought to be paid, are in fact the most essential workers at the moment this country has got. But in addition, there are people out there working in the heart of the hot spots to make sure that the masks everybody needs are being manufactured and shipped and moved appropriately, or sometimes inappropriately, throughout the system. So this was an interesting starting point on what exactly is going on out there and what are we doing with those folks. This also, I think, came in response to my questions about, well, if these are relatively low-paid individuals, aren't they particularly susceptible to someone showing up with wads of cash, bribing them to move an order from one plane to another or to divert the plane from one destination to another? So again, this commentary piece, to get America through this pandemic, the supply chain needs to be tested, sequestered, and compensated. Scott Case, the author here, Freight Waves, the source. Supply chain workers who are allowed access to airplanes, cargo ships, and locomotive engines have been put through a rigorous battery of security checks. That's a, post 9/11 anti-terrorism measure. An even more select few who operate the planes, cargo loaders, and port gantry cranes, and who perform important fueling and maintenance requirements, must remain healthy to keep medical supplies, food, and other essential items moving through our supply chain. We have already seen COVID-19 related disruptions in air traffic control towers. We did note that a few weeks back, right? Ports in Southern California are changing their hours to allow for cleaning and disinfecting between shifts. Businesses across Europe and America are suffering right now. This week, and this was back in late March, more than 3 million Americans, remember that one, filed under unemployment claims. Hotels and restaurants are among the hardest hit as social distancing has caused their occupancy and business to plummet. For restaurants, state-level shelter-in-place or stay-at-home orders have pushed them to close their dining rooms and move to a pickup or delivery model only. The Senate passed a $2 trillion bill early Thursday morning, and the House is taking it up on Friday, again, late March, right? This package will not be the last that America needs. I am calling on congressional leaders and industry thought leaders to work together to provide safe and sequestered accommodations for America's supply chain workers at airports, seaports, and railroads. These people should be housed at no charge, fed at no charge, receive additional pay from the federal government for their service to the country, and have ready and available access to frequent and necessary COVID-19 testing to ensure they are not placing their fellow employees at risk. Let me jump off of this path for just a second to take note, as we did at the top of the show, of the end of federal funding for testing for the public at large, and they never really got around to testing the public at large, but while at the same time insisting on frequent and repeated testing both for the president and his close staff, but also testing for anybody who's on their way in to meet with the president. And now I understand from a tweet from earlier in the day from Yamiche Alcindor that they will be using those Abbott Labs tests not only to test everybody who's going to meet with the president, but now testing all members of the press who show up for press briefings, while the rest of us get nothing. And I don't know how many of these units Abbott is producing, but they were only sending a smattering to the states. And I don't know whether you could call it hoarding or not, but they seem to be using I would imagine they would have to dedicate a fairly large number of these testing machines and test kits in order to just maintain a safe atmosphere in and around the White House, which ordinarily would be a normal and understood and acceptable use for all of this, except now we're talking about saving Donald Trump, which I don't think is worth anything, and they really ought to just kick him right out on the front lawn and say, good luck to you. But okay, that's not what we do in this country. But could we divert some portion of this or some other manufacturer's equally rapid test to the front lines of the supply chain? That's what's being argued here, along with, I think quite reasonably insisting that there should be a safe and sequestered set of accommodations for supply chain workers. To prevent further spread, the article continues, healthcare workers across the country are choosing to remain at the hospitals and other facilities they are tirelessly working in on the front lines of the battle with those critically ill and infected. If they are going home, they are self-sequestering from their families for the foreseeable future. Though they place themselves at risk every moment they are at work, they do not want to do the same to their loved ones. We need Congress, airlines, ground handlers, ports, and railroads to come together to protect these people and ensure they have access to necessary testing. By enacting a plan such as this, America can support hotels by providing guests at a time when business and leisure travel is zero. Right? Federal funding for putting them up in hotels is essentially what we're talking about. Support restaurants that have had to let go of bartenders, servers, and front of the house staff by having them prepare meals for them. Provide additional compensation to people who may now be the sole source of income in a household where a spouse, partner, or fellow renters may be out of work. Perhaps it could be piloted somewhere first. As the president of the International Air Cargo Association of Chicago, I would be willing to lead the charge here in Chicago, starting at O'Hare and Midway, to see if this can be made a reality. While passenger flights have been slashed to next to nothing, charter operations, especially here in Chicago, have spun up and are off the charts, both from all cargo operators and passenger airlines offering their aircraft to ferry cargo. America's goods must keep moving. America's supply chain must remain open. Critical infrastructure elements with limited workforce pools must be protected. And a very good point and an interesting one. And I don't know how much thought has been given to protecting the supply chain workers. And I don't know. That seems very bizarre to me that we haven't heard more about it. And I think he makes a good suggestion. Let's see. Other interesting pieces that probably ought to be reported. Did I discuss this one? I can't be sure. And if I didn't, I want to get it out there. So again, we're going to jump tracks here for just a second. If it hasn't been mentioned explicitly or perhaps only in passing, I want to read you the article. NBC News reporting early in April 3rd, so not that long ago, about a week ago. Firm under sanctions made Russian ventilators shipped to U.S., pictures show. Did you know that the Russians had sent ventilators? Did you know that, as a matter of fact, yesterday's White House briefing was apparently delayed for some time as Trump had a phone call with Mr. Bonesaw Mohammed bin Salman, and Vladimir Putin. And I think they were actually on a conference call between the three of them, or perhaps they were talked separately, but apparently he was late to the briefing because of who he was talking to. And, I'd rather he was speaking to, leaders of the free world, but I don't know what they were talking about. Anyway, I think we may have noted in passing that some ventilators during our big ventilator crisis have showed up, and they came from Russia. And, well, I'll read you the article, and then we'll do a little bit of speculating about it afterwards. But in this case, the ventilators that showed up came from a company under U.S. sanctions, which is about as naked a play as I've seen made so far with aid. I think it's fairly obvious, though no one seems to be discussing it, that the idea here is for a sanctioned company to send much-needed ventilators. Whether they work or not, I don't know. And for Trump, essentially, to then say, well, they helped us. Now we need to help them. They're under sanctions. I don't think the sanctions are fair. We should lift them. And then Vladimir Putin gets everything he wanted in exchange for some ventilators, which we needed, to be sure. But anyway. Now, what's weird about this is the subheader here says it's simply a farce. Tweeted a group of Russian doctors saying they've been collecting donations to buy supplies while Moscow sells them to Washington. No surprise there that Putin and Trump seem to be working on the same weird playbook. Supplies absolutely necessary in their own countries, for whatever reason, being flown out under rather high profiles as well and delivered elsewhere. Matthew Bodner and Abigail Williams put this piece together. A subsidiary of a Russian company that has been sanctioned by the U.S. manufactured ventilators that were transported from Moscow to New York this week to help tackle the coronavirus pandemic, according to pictures of the delivery. And there are some questions. We'll see whether this article asks them or not. When the military plane touched down at John F. Kennedy Airport on Wednesday, it was met with a warm welcome by air traffic controllers, but as the boxes filled with ventilators were unloaded, images showed them identified as a model known as the Aventa M, a type of ventilator manufactured by a subsidiary of a sanctioned Russian company. So by law, we shouldn't be accepting those things. But we need them. They're ventilators, right? The manufacturer is the Ural Instrument Engineering Plant, or UPZ, located in the city of, Chelyabinsk, maybe. 930 miles east of Moscow, Russian media group RBC reported Friday. UPZ is part of got to turn the sound down here. UPZ is part of the concern Radio Electric Technologies, KRET, which is itself a unit of Russian state defense and technology conglomerate Rostec. Have you followed all of that? Both Rostec and KRET have been on the U.S. sanctions list since 2014, which means U.S. firms and nationals are barred from doing business with them. The flight was the result of a phone call between Presidents Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin on Monday and was characterized by the Kremlin as a humanitarian aid flight, implying the ventilators and masks aboard the flight were donated to the U.S. Were they? Well, the State Department in a statement Thursday said it paid for the cargo, which is different. Replying to this charge, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, perhaps, told Russian state news agencies that the cost of the cargo was, in fact, a third option, split 50-50, with half of the manifest paid for by the U.S. and half paid for by the Russian Direct Investment Fund, Moscow's sovereign wealth fund, which is a weird party to be working in this too, but is, of course, under the control of Putin, and I guess that's how he drew those funds. And like Trump, he thinks all monies in Russia are his, and he can do any way he wants. Russia's sovereign wealth fund, the Russian Direct Investment Fund, or RDIF, a $10 billion sovereign wealth fund started under Putin in 2011, which was added to the U.S. sectoral sanctions in 2015. It said that it had paid for half the shipment of medical equipment to the United States, but it declined to comment when asked about the medical supplies themselves. The State Department official told NBC News on Friday that medical equipment and supplies do not fall under sanctions, so there is that. The Russian Direct Investment Fund, though, is subject to certain debt and equity-related sectoral sanctions, which would not apply to transactions for the provision of medical equipment and supplies, the official said. Also on Friday, do we trust them? Maybe. It's an explanation. It sounds plausible, but has anybody checked? Also on Friday, a Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, same one, right? Maria Zakharova. So a little bit of a typo here. Told Reuters, aren't ventilators needed in the United States? Very trolly, right? She added that Russia could take them back if they were not wanted. This gesture has come under political fire both in the U.S. and in Russia, as medical supplies are sorely needed in both countries. In the United States, Trump critics, a demographic that strongly overlaps with critics of Putin, decried the White House for accepting humanitarian aid from a major geopolitical competitor. There is that. And a comment from David Frum in this one, and we'll skip over this and make this note before we get to the end here. We're not going to be able to finish it all. But it was also alleged at some point, I think on Twitter, and I don't know if I'll be able to dig this one up, that it wasn't entirely certain that those things had in fact been manufactured by this sanctioned company, and that it might have been a PR ploy, that they stamped their logo on it so that they would get goodwill from the United States for providing ventilators that might in fact have been made by someone else.
From Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Anyway, just wanted to get that on the record. Justice Putnam will get even more on the record with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next. We'll catch up with all the usual suspects, plus a collection of stories from around the world, as usual. Don't lose sight of what's happening in the natural world. The aftermath of Category 5 Cyclone Harold reported on next.